What good is a homestead garden if we don't preserve the harvest? Preserving what we grow extends the season, making us more self-reliant. But how do we do this when life is so busy? Getting everything preserved can be challenging, especially if you work and you have a lot to do. It just seems like everybody is so busy and their schedules are so hectic. My life is very full, and to get all of my preserving done, there's a few things that I do that is very helpful, right from planting to harvesting all the way to preserving. Summer squash pumps out a lot of squash during the hot summer months, as you know, and you have to almost be out there on a daily basis harvesting it. But what do you do with it? Generally, I slice my summer squash really thin and I'll dry it. These make really great chips. Or I'll blanch it and freeze it for winter use in stir fries. But one of my new favorite ways of using my summer squash is making a freezer summer squash soup. Sounds weird, but it's delicious. It's a great way to use up a lot of squash quickly, even if the squash is a little bit on the bigger side. One of my favorite things about it is it makes an easy dinner for a winter's night. All you have to do is pull it out of the freezer a couple of hours before dinner time, warm it up, add some cream, and then serve it with a roll. And voila, there's dinner. You can even put some cheese over the top of it, any cheese you like. All you have to do to make this is heat up some olive oil and saute some chopped onions, garlic, some fresh rosemary, thyme, and salt and pepper. Then you add the chopped squash once the onions are translucent, and cook covered until the squash is soft. I use an immersion blender to blend it, but a blender or a food processor works well too. Pour it into a quart or pint jars depending on the size of your family. Simple and easy. Great for busy people. Tomatoes are one of my favorite crops to preserve. They're really easy to preserve, and we use so many of them because they're so versatile. This year our tomatoes aren't doing as good as they did last year. Last year we put up over 300 quarts of tomatoes. That's a lot of tomatoes. This year they're slower because we've had 2 months of 100 degrees, and 2 weeks of that has been almost hitting 110, maybe even some days a little bit more. You can help your tomatoes out by giving them some shade cloth and making sure that the soil stays moist and you mulch. But when temperatures reach 110 degrees, there's not much you can do other than wait for fall for the fruit to set. I like to cut the tomatoes in half and place them on a cookie sheet and bake them for about 30 to 45 minutes at 350 degrees. You can add some onions and garlic as well. This softens the skin, and then I'll run them through a food mill. That removes a lot of the skin and seeds. You can put them straight into a jar and process them. This can save a lot of time peeling the tomatoes. This super simple tomato sauce can be changed up really easy by adding different herbs into it. It can be used as a marinara sauce, put into chili, and many other dishes. I love having a lot of this on hand. You can freeze dry tomatoes as well. They're excellent when you put other types of herbs on them, sea salt on them, or even sprinkle some Parmesan cheese over them. When you rehydrate them, they're an excellent substitute for sun-dried tomatoes. I love to dry a whole bunch of these tomatoes, powder them up, and use that powder in breads. This makes the best tomato basil bread you've ever had. The tomato powder is also excellent for a substitute for tomato paste, and it's really good sprinkled over the top of eggs. I grow a lot of regular red tomatoes for my bottling. This is like Celebrity, Early Girl, Romas, and San Marzanos. These are traditional for your red colors. But there's no reason that you can't bottle up some of your heirloom tomatoes. Even though the color isn't red, they still work out just fine. They're not as tangy, they're a little bit more on the sweet side, but they still make a great sauce. Currants are ripe right now, and it's time to harvest them. They're extremely tedious to harvest, but they're well worth it. My favorite way to preserve these is to freeze them. I'll rinse them off, and then I'll put them on a cookie sheet single layer so that they're nice and loose. The little stems are a real pain to get off, and by freezing them with their stems on, all you have to do is roll them around once they're frozen to knock off those stems. Then I put them in a bag. You could dry them or just leave them in the freezer. They're great dried and added to granola. If you had them frozen, you can throw them into breads or even muffins. They actually have quite a few uses. I really love green beans, but I actually don't like to pick them. That's probably because our summers are so hot here and beans are time consuming to pick. So I like to plant them in little groupings, in successions. That way I have small amounts of beans that I can pick over the week and do a nice sized batch once a week without getting overwhelmed or even overheated. This year we're freeze drying a lot of them. I take the ends off and cut them into bite-sized pieces and then blanch them for a minute or two. I don't blanch most vegetables when I'm freeze drying, but I found that the beans taste better if I do blanch them. I make some fresh pesto with basil and carrot tops, mix them together, place them on a tray, and sprinkle them with Parmesan cheese. You can freeze dry them or even use a regular food dryer till they're nice and crisp. Cucumbers, both our slicing and pickling, are once again productive this year. We get a lot of these slicers that come on first, and I love to make refrigerator pickles out of these with the ones that we don't eat fresh. It's a super easy process to do, and I only have to do small batches at a time. To help your refrigerator pickles be crisp, be sure that you scrub the blossom end off really well and then put a grape leaf or a cabbage leaf over the top before placing on the lid. Our pickling cucumbers are just starting to come on, and they're coming on very strong. Some of my favorite things to do with pickling cucumbers is to make dill pickles, garlic dill pickles, relishes, and bread and butter pickles. Tomatillos are wildly prolific during the summer months, and they make great salsa verde. I'll put up a lot of salsa verde for winter use, and one of my favorite ways to use it is to make chicken enchilada. And usually when I make this, I'll make a few extra batches to put in the freezer for those winter nights that I just can't get dinner on the table. I've tried fermenting tomatillos before, and I actually didn't care for it so much, so I'm not going to be doing that one again. Tomatillos can really be productive as long as you keep the potato beetle under control. I pulled up just a few beets and turnips just to get them on some freeze dryer trays to dry when the freeze dryer opens up. I'll slice them real thin with a food processor, then place them in a bowl with some apple cider vinegar, olive oil, and let them soak for about 20 minutes. Then spread them out on the freeze dryer tray. This makes an excellent vegetable chip. Oh, and don't forget to sprinkle them with some sea salt. The cherries were on in June, but life was full of obstacles. So the best thing that I could do was pick what I could and store them in the refrigerator until I had time to process them. We still have some bottled cherries from last year that I need to get used up first. And I did sell a lot of cherries, and we had a lot of cherries left over. You gotta realize that a mature cherry tree can produce about 200 pounds. And I have 3 cherry trees. We've been doing a lot of freezing and freeze drying of our cherries. Freeze-dried cherries last a really long time, so we don't have to worry about using those up right away. And they're excellent when you reconstitute them and put them in breads, muffins, or even over the top of oatmeal. They're very versatile. This year I made bourbon cherries, which is great over the top of cheesecake as well as ice cream. I've also been bottling a lot of my cherries in apple cider with the pits. This is a quick way to get it done fast. The nice thing about using apple cider as your liquid for the cherries is you're not using any sugar. And then that apple cider, it gets infused with the cherries, making a really tasty liquid that can be used in place of water to reconstitute your oatmeal. So that makes an excellent oatmeal with a side of cherries for breakfast. The first round of figs are on, and they're usually the biggest. Not as numerous though. One of my favorite things to do with the figs is to dry them. I don't like to freeze dry them because I like the texture and the taste better of just the traditionally dried over freeze-dried figs. Dried figs can be used in artisan breads, in desserts, as well as you can make fig cookies with them. Another one of my favorite ways to store figs is by making a honey candied fig. They're great on charcuterie boards with cheeses. I'll put a link to my video on how to make honey candied figs. They're really good. Apricots are always plentiful, and they're quite perishable when they're ripe, so they need to be harvested and preserved rather quickly. It seems like this time of year, all I'm doing is harvesting and preserving, so I have to find the fastest ways that I can so that I can preserve everything that I've got. We don't care for bottled apricots so much, so it doesn't make sense to bottle them if we're not going to eat them. One of my favorite ways to preserve our apricots is either just drying in a traditional dryer or in a freeze dryer. When I'm freeze drying my apricots and I want to get them done quickly, I'll puree a bunch of apricots because they take up less space when they're pureed, pour it right into the tray and freeze dry them. Once they're completely dry, then I put them in a blender, blend them up so that they're a powder. The powder takes up a lot less room, and that powder can be used in many different ways. If you wanted to, you could turn that apricot powder into preserves later on when you have time. I also like apricot powder in apple cider as well as sweetbreads. Apricots are rich in magnesium, which is great for stress busting. They're also a great antioxidant, and they help with inflammation. So having apricots on the pantry shelf to us is essential. I also like to dry a lot of apricots just in the traditional dryer. These are a great snack. You just want to make sure that your apricots are very ripe. That way they're nice and sweet and they're not too tart. You also want to make sure that you don't want to over dry them and make them too hard, because then they're hard to chew. We have a large dehydrator, which is great when you've got a lot of vegetables and fruit that you need to dry all at once. But if you have smaller jobs, we like a little dehydrator that's called the London Sunshine. This is great because it's small enough to fit on your counter, it's quiet, and it doesn't heat your house up. It's fabulous for your little jobs that you need to get done. The only way that I can keep up with my preserving for winter is to do smaller batches more often. On days I don't work, I can preserve all day, but that doesn't happen too often. I harvest in the morning when the temperatures are cooler, and that makes the vegetables last longer if I can't get to everything that day. By harvesting in the morning, the veggies have higher water content and they can wait an extra day if need be. I harvest and preserve what's most urgent first, like squash, cucumbers, and bush beans, before they get overripe or even oversized. Eggplants, peppers, and things like beets and carrots can stay on the plant or in the ground a little bit longer, allowing you time to get the things done that are most urgent. Some days I might only get 7 pints done, and other days I might get 42 quarts done on a good day, and even more if I have help. The unfortunate thing about preserving is you're on the produce's schedule and not yours. Most things can wait a day or two, and I always try to schedule a few hours a few times a week throughout the summer and fall months to get my preserving done. The versatility of all these different vegetables and fruits preserved in different ways will help you to keep from getting bored from the same thing over and over with your winter preserves. Preserving a little here and there adds up over the summer, making a lot of food for your winter self-sufficiency. Even if you only put up 10 to 20 jars and some dried goods, that's more than you started out with, and you're providing yourself with far better food. And when the last apple of the season has been preserved for winter, it feels so good. I'm thankful for every bit that I have, and also thankful for what I can get done. May God bless you with a bountiful harvest this season and the time to preserve what you grow.